come on up, and I will bring her up as soon as I do a little bio about her. Okay, as I said, Dr. Coley is president of Cal State Polytech University in Pomona, California. Dr. Coley believes that a quality education remains one of the few pathways to social and economic well-being in a global society. She has built bridges between the university and the community through the service, research, and work as an administrator. Dr. Coley has over 26 years of academic and administrative experience. She is married to U.S. Marine Corps Lieutenant Colonel Ron Coley, retired. My husband is a Marine too. And serving on the African American Advisory Council, APAC. Oh, that's not it. And that was it. I'm sorry. So right now, thank you for, give Dr. Coley a hand as she comes up.
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank you for the invitation, Ms. Royston, and I also, in the 15 minutes that I've been allotted, I want to pull from Dr. Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech. In fact, being here this evening and looking at the video brings back a flood of memories. My father was a Southern Baptist minister who died when I was 4. And then my stepfather was also a Southern Baptist minister, so there was something about mama and minister. And my stepfather served as the president of our local NAACP chapter, and we experienced threats. He was very involved in trying to desegregate the schools of Goldsboro, North Carolina. And he instilled within me a deep admiration of the work and the people this organization advocates for. And for this, I am so grateful. And so I want to commend the NAACP for continuing to advocate not only for us, but for this country. And as I was thinking about the theme of this evening's program and the multi-dimensions of Dr. Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech, I also reflected on the dream deferred by outstanding poet Langston Hughes. And there is another dimension to our dream in this country of ours. It's our dream that for some is a nightmare. Our dreams hold questions as we ask ourselves, when can we awaken to see full acceptance, full inclusion for all of us? And so I want to take a few moments to look at the contrast of our awakened state and our dreams and, yes, our nightmares. One might say our nightmare began as the earliest Africans arrived in the English colony in North America in 1619 as a result of being traded for food and supplies. And by the mid to late 1600s, laws were passed that would mark Africans as enslaved or servants for life. They were seen as objects, and they were seen as property. And among the justifications of this was religion, indicating that non-Christians were deserving of enslavement. And during the 1600s through the 1700s, the freeing of slaves was actually outlawed. Moreover, the enslaved people could be inherited. So the nightmare was passed from one generation to the next. And as time passed, Abraham Lincoln proclaimed that democracy was the last best hope on the earth, and that democracy required freedom. And it called upon the people to do what was right and what was necessary to free the slaves, with the hope of bringing our nightmares to an end. And thus, the 13th Amendment of our Constitution sought the liberation of the enslaved people. Again, there was the dream of freedom. However, to appease the Southern slave owners, it was determined that segregation would become the law, because it was believed that blacks and whites were incapable of coexisting. And so a dream of freedom, a dream of acceptance and respect was again dashed. And our hopes and dreams were again deferred. And starting in 1865, the black codes of the South dictated most aspects of black people's lives, including where they could work and where they could live. The so-called Jim Crow laws, named after the derogatory term for blacks, segregated everything from neighborhoods to schools to transportation. And the 1896 Supreme Court case of Plessy versus Ferguson ruled the segregation was constitutional and established the idea of separate but equal. But equal was never honored, and the dreams of equality and of respect were never realized. And these were the circumstances that I grew up in, as I was born in the Jim Crow South, where I was segregated by the color of my skin, forced to use back doors at restaurants as a young child, and unable to swim in the same public pools as other children my own age. I remember watching the news and seeing dogs attack peaceful protesters. Police beat elderly men and women who were trying to register to vote. And as noted on the video, and the black churches that were burned in communities that looked like mine. I lived in the legally required housing segregated neighborhoods, along with separate schools with hand-me-down books, pages torn, and non-functional equipment. These are the dreams deferred, circumstances that black teachers worked in and we faced as students. And going to the back of the bus, separate water fountains and bathrooms, the dream of equality remained deferred. Among one of my earliest memories in terms of the back of the bus was that I recognized the challenge of parents to try to protect their child's sense of being okay. And as my mother and I got on the bus to go visit my grandmother, I, being very rambunctious, I got on the front seat. And the mother has to determine, what do I tell my child at 5 and 6 years old? Do I tell her the truth, or do I try to protect her sense of self? So she said to me, I've got games and books and food, and we don't want to disturb the driver. So we're going to sit in the back of the bus. So now today, when I ride a bus, I'm on the front seat because I know that parents had to determine, do I really give them the harsh reality? And they will learn soon enough, but how do I protect their sense of worth? And through the hopes and dreams of the NAACP, they argued that white-only real estate was morally wrong. And while some small cracks of access opened up in the cities, whites fled to white-only communities in what would be considered later the suburbs. Moreover, with the return of World War II soldiers, there was a federal act of 1949 that subsidized housing for whites only. And the blacks would again have their dreams of access to purchase housing on resale was dashed. Moreover, our dreams of access, public school education emerged as the school segregation laws were declared unconstitutional in 1954. And in Arkansas in 1957, the president had to deploy federal troops to ensure the 9 black students, or the Little Rock 9, could enter high school. And holding on to the dream, Martin Luther King and others protested with the passage of the 1964 Civil Rights Act that outlawed discrimination. The dream of an inclusive society felt like it would be a lived experience. But writers such as Langston Hughes saw the dream deferred And as Dr. King noted, that even though blacks were technically free from slavery, they were not free in any larger sense, for the chains of discrimination continue to define the black experience. He argued that black Americans must cash the check they were promised a century ago and demand the riches of freedom and the security of justice. Furthermore, Dr. King argued that in order to bring true justice, Americans of all races will need to unite and remain true to the values of nonviolent solidarity. He dreamed that one day the country will live out the true meaning of its creed of equality for all. And I remember listening to I Have a Dream. I remember hearing Dr. King's words pour over me, filling me with optimism in that moment. I was connected to millions of people across our country, united in hope, united in purpose. And I remember when the Civil Rights Act of 1964 passed, and when Shirley Chisholm ran for president in 1972, and when I watched Barack Obama become our 44th president. And through the emotions of that day, I was transported in time. I could feel my grandmother's hand. I could feel the warmth of her skin as she led me through our neighborhood in North Carolina, knocking on doors, helping to register black voters, even with threats. I could hear her voice as she spoke to our neighbors, sharing her beliefs and convictions for the future, convictions for my future and for our collective future. And while one might say that some aspects of those dreams, our dreams, have been realized, but we also know that education, wealth, positionality does not immune us from exclusionary practices. It doesn't immune us from discrimination or hate. We also know that for many, they are still living the harsh reality of their nightmares. The income gap between black and white Americans remains significant, and in 2022, the median income for black households was approximately $48,000 compared to $74,000 for white households. Black Americans have higher poverty rates compared to white Americans, and in 2022, the poverty rate for black Americans was about 20% compared to 10% for white Americans. The wealth gap between black and white Americans has persisted over decades, with black families typically holding a fraction of the wealth of white families. The unemployment rate for black Americans is consistently higher than that for others. In 2024, the unemployment rate for black Americans was approximately 6.5% compared to 4.0% for white Americans. Black Americans face disparities in business ownership and access to capital black-owned businesses. The high school graduation rate for black students is generally lower. In 2022, the graduation rate for black students was 79% compared to 89% for white students. College enrollment and completion rates are lower. In 2022, 52% of black high school graduates enrolled in college immediately, compared to 69% of white graduates. And of course, you know of the health disparities. Black Americans experience higher rates of certain chronic conditions, such as hypertension, diabetes, and heart disease, and access to health care and socioeconomic factors. And the life expectancy for black Americans is lower. As of 2023, the average life expectancy for black Americans was about 73 years compared to 78 for others. And as of 2023, about 45% of black households own their homes compared to about 75% of white households. Black Americans often face discrimination in the housing market. Studies have shown that black applicants are more likely to be denied mortgages and often face higher interest rates. And so, yes, we have made some progress, but there is still so much to be done to make Dr. King's dream a reality. But I believe that only together can we continue to move from a dream to a better reality. We come from a long line of advocates, individuals whose selflessness and sacrifice have allowed us to have the freedoms they so longed for. And with organizations such as the NAACP that have worked for us to gain access and opportunity, we will continue advocating and advancing. It requires that we must continue to answer the call. We must all have a better sense of the dream and the reality for all. And so in closing, I wish to leave you with some excerpts from my poem, the poem that I read every day. And Still I Rise by Maya Angelou. You may write me down in history with your bitter, twisted lies. You may trod me in the very dirt, but still like dust I rise. Just like moons and the suns, with the certainty of tides, just like hopes springing high, still I rise. Did you want to see me broken, bowed head and lowered eyes, shoulders falling down like teardrops, weakened by my soulful cries? You may shoot me with your words, you may cut me with your eyes, you may kill me with your hatefulness, but still like air, I rise. So out of the huts of history's shame, I rise. Up from a past that's rooted in pain, I rise. I'm a black ocean, leaping and wide, welling and swelling, I bear in the tide. Leaving behind nights of terror and fear, I rise. Into a daybreak that's wondrously clear, I rise. Bringing the gifts that my ancestors gave, I am the dream, and I am the hope of the slave. I rise, I rise, I rise. Thank you.